Well, folks, it's tornado season, and the Obama administration has found itself beset by a whirlwind of scandals. You got the fallout from the terrorist attack on our diplomatic mission in Benghazi, and then the Obama administration's willful attempts to mislead the American public about what they knew and when they knew it. There's the IRS targeting and harassment of conservative groups and individuals, and the auditing of conservative and Republican donors, and the release of their private information to news sources. And then, of course, there's the AP, the Justice Department, collecting the phone records of AP reporters and also labeling James Rosen, a Fox News reporter, as a co-conspirator and some kind of espionage, and seizing his personal emails. And finally, the cumulative effect of all these scandals forced President Obama to do the unthinkable. He came out to the Rose Garden for a press conference in which reporters asked him actual questions.
Can you assure the American people that nobody in the White House knew about the agency's actions before your counsel's office found out on April 22nd? And when they did find out, do you think that you should have learned about it before you learned about it from news reports, as you said last Friday?
How do you feel about comparisons by some of your critics of this week's scandals to those of the Nixon administration?
So naturally, this is big. MSNBC had to cover this, right? Now, why do I bring up MSNBC? Well, here's the deal. The left, we know, for 8 years under George W. Bush, kept trying to manufacture a scandal that they could attach to the Bush administration. Something to try and replicate or even exceed the taint that went with the Clinton-Lewinsky sex scandal. And they hated George W. Bush. They kept trying to manufacture scandals. They tried to tie him in with Enron. That didn't work. No connection there. The leaking of Valerie Plame's name, that seemed like it was a genuine scandal. Then we found out, well, it was pretty common knowledge that she worked for the CIA, so not really as bad as initially thought. And also, it turns out that even though they kept trying, and I believe hoping passionately and vehemently that the person who leaked Valerie Plame's name was someone like Karl Rove or Dick Cheney, it turned out to be Richard Armitage, who the Democrats didn't really care about. Rove, Cheney, President Bush, none of them were complicit in it. You had the thing with Alberto Gonzales that they eventually did force him to resign, but they kept trying to make a big deal out of the firing of those 7 U.S. attorneys who were fired for incompetence, basically performance-related. Their deficient performance as U.S. attorneys. Well, that was not a scandal for a variety of reasons, one of which is their dismissal was something that the Bush administration had the legal authority to do for whatever reason. They kind of got really bat-crap insane towards the end of the Bush presidency, accusing him of crazy things like lying to take us into a war in Iraq, even though they had absolutely no evidence of that. So they were never able to get a scandal like that, a genuine scandal that they could implicate President George W. Bush in. So how did the most passionate Democrats I know, which can be found on MSNBC, handle the fact that now you've got a cluster, not just one, but several bona fide scandals in the Obama administration? How would they cover that? Well, on the day that President Obama gave that press conference in the Rose Garden, I decided to tune in to MSNBC. So 7 o'clock, I tune in. First show, All In with Chris Hayes. How would he cover all of these scandals?
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, and thank you for joining us this evening. It was a big day today because Washington has a case of scandal fever. And today, President Obama showed how he plans to dole out the medicine.
And that was it. That was all Chris Hayes had to say about all of these scandals and Obama's Rose Garden press conference until 44 minutes into the program when he finally got around to discussing these scandals with a ditz, a hack, and Howard Feynman. Howard Feynman's okay. He occasionally says stupid things, but he's not as bad as these other idiots. Now, here's a question. What do you think is the most serious of these three scandals? A, the Obama administration failing to adequately secure our diplomatic mission in Libya and then lying about a terrorist attack on said mission. B, the IRS targeting and harassing conservative groups and individuals, auditing backers of Republican candidates and conservative causes, and releasing private taxpayer information in violation of federal law. Or C, the Justice Department secretly subpoenaing AP phone records. Well, here's what Chris Hayes thinks is the most serious of those three.
The most serious by far to me is the story about the Department of Justice having secretly subpoenaed the phone records of the Associated Press.
Really? Now, I actually have to commend Chris Hayes because he did, unlike so many of his other colleagues on the left, lay into the Obama administration over the Benghazi terrorist attack that took the lives of Ambassador Stevens, Navy SEALs Doherty and Woods, and Information Officer Smith.
Those lives do not weigh, I think, anywhere near as heavily on our body politic as they should. And that, to me, is amazing how much the specter of that has been removed. Whether or not there were lies, it was still a policy engineered by that administration, and there is still, has to be accountability just in the basic conscience and soul of the people that oversaw.
I'm sorry. That is actually Chris Hayes talking about the Iraq War casualties. Do we have what he said about the Benghazi deaths?
Here is my take on Benghazi. It is what we like to call in the business a nothing burger. There is nothing there, and I think the
pre-existing witch hunt on Benghazi, which they really struggled to turn into a scandal, in large part because they themselves cannot seem to settle on what the scandal even is. It's a cover-up. Just don't ask what's being covered up.
The increasingly Byzantine manufactured
Benghazi scandal.
Now, I know that Chris Hayes sounds like a real off there. Moving on to how Rachel Maddow covered this scandal stuff and Obama's press conference, she didn't. Not really. She opened up her show that evening with some story about China and didn't really talk about any of these other scandals or even Obama's press conference. She tangentially touched on it at one point, but didn't really cover any of these other scandals except the IRS scandal. And here I have to give Rachel Maddow credit. She did devote one segment of her show to the IRS scandal and did go into detail about how the IRS leaked taxpayers' private information to at least one organization, ProPublica, in violation of federal law. But that was the only segment she devoted. That was the only point in that entire show that evening where she devoted an entire segment, and it wasn't even that long of a segment, to any one of these scandals or the Obama press conference. I didn't watch The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell because, frankly, he's a very mean, nasty little man, and I've just decided there's no point in watching him anymore. So that about wraps up MSNBC's coverage of the scandals, and as you can see, they're not quite in full spin mode yet, but they're getting there. And we've got more on this. This is enough for one video. Please check out my blog. We've got some interesting articles on there. Love for you to check them out. Share them with your friends and comment on them. Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. If you like what you see, then subscribe to me on YouTube. And until next time, don't mess with the right-wing genius.